If you're here, you probably already know what a dock or hub is and that you want one. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I've got two docks from iVANKY, the Fusion Dock Max 1 and the Fusion Dock Pro 1 Plus. And I'm just going to walk through their capabilities and the potential issues you may run into depending on your use case and your setup. iVANKY sent me their Fusion Dock Max as well as their Max Dock Pro Plus to make video, but they don't have any say or input into the content of the video. It's not a sponsored video aside from them giving me these docks. And I was interested in checking out the Fusion Dock Max because it has so many ports. And I'm mostly a desktop PC guy, so I'm used to having so many ports. But the primary way that the iVANKY Fusion Dock Max differentiates itself from other Thunderbolt 4 docks or hubs is that it has two Thunderbolt 4 boards or circuits, or however you want to describe it, which basically gives you the opportunity to connect up to 4 6K displays or 4 5K displays or 4 4K displays, 4 1440p displays or 4 1080p displays simultaneously, so long as you have the right Mac. In order to get all those displays connected at once, you do need to have a MacBook Pro Max, a MacBook Pro Max Pro. What are they called? You need to have a Max or you need to have a Mac Studio. I don't have either of those things. I only have the M3 Pro MacBook Pro, so I can only connect 2 displays. So again, it's going to depend on the actual Mac that you're trying to connect to, even though the Fusion Dock gives you the ability to connect up to 4 displays. So even though I can't use all the display options, is the Fusion Dock Max overkill? And I don't think it is necessarily. So let's break down the capabilities, starting with the display options. So over USB-C, which is Thunderbolt 3 or 4, that's giving you 4 6K or 4 5K displays up to 60 Hertz. Or you could do 4 4K displays of 120 Hertz, or you could do 4 1440p up to 165 Hertz, or you could do 4 1080ps up to 240 Hertz. There's also 2 HDMI inputs on the back of the Fusion Dock, which allows for 2 4K 60 Hertz, 2 1440 165 Hertz, or 2 1080p 240 Hertz. So even though there's 6 inputs, HDMI and USB-C, you can only have a total of 4 monitors. But you could mix and match HDMI and USB-C, but you don't get more than 4 total is what I'm trying to say. So aside from the display connectivity, what else do you get? So you get a big ass power brick to provide power to all of your stuff. Connecting it to the MacBook, you have 96 watts of power to the laptop. It has 4 USB-C 40 gigabit per second ports, which also provide 15 watts of power simultaneously. It has 2 USB-C 10 gigabit ports, one which provides 30 watt charging and one 7.5 watts. It has 5 USB-A 3.2 10 gigabit per second ports, which have 7.5 watts output. There's also an optical audio input, so if you have speakers, soundbar, those kinds of things that use that optical connector, you can plug it into the Fusion Dock. It also has a 3.5-inch audio line out, which is interesting. I haven't made use of that. So over here, I've got a Rodecaster Duo, and presumably if I had the right connection, the right cable, I could take all of the audio from the MacBook and run it into the Rodecaster. So if I was doing a live stream or a podcast, I could run all that audio into that stream or show, or I could record it. It also has a 3.5 audio jack on the front, which can be used for microphones or headphones. On the back, it has 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. And finally, there is a UHS-2 SD card and micro SD card reader on the front. And supposedly you can read those simultaneously, although I haven't tried. It just seems like overkill. There's too many options with this thing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my use case, what I have plugged into the Fusion Dock Max, and why I didn't necessarily think it was overkill, even though I can't make use of all of the display options. And to do that, I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the Fusion Dock Pro 1 Plus. It allows you to connect up to 3 displays over HDMI. So you're going to be limited to 4K 60 Hertz with this dock, but you can do 1440p and 1080p as well. And on the back, you have 2 USB 10 gigabit per second. You've got a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. It has a 20 volt DC power brick. Boop. And then on the front, you have 2 USB-Cs. One is, I think, 30 watt charging, and I'm not sure about the other one in terms of charging. And then there's also an additional 2 USB-A 10 gigabit per second. You have the same SD card reader, the same speed. All of these are full speed, by the way. And I did test that, and the SD card reader speeds I was getting were exactly the same as I got on the SD card reader of the MacBook Pro. So that is the full size and the micro SD card reader. And it also has the audio jack on the front. So this is for microphone in or headphone out. It does not have the line out of the Max dock. On the side is the USB-C port to plug it into the MacBook. So that doesn't take up one of the ports on the front or the back of the device. The reason that I thought that the Fusion dock would work better for me is that it just has way more ports, and it has more USB-C ports. And I have some devices connected, the Rodecaster Duo, I've got my ATEM Mini, I've got an external SSD. I also have the Elgato prompter hooked up so that I can read the script for this as I record this video. I have the dongle for this wireless mouse connected. My iPhone is charging on it right now, and of course I've got the MacBook hooked up to it. And there's still a lot of leftover ports. And this probably can accommodate all of those things, but it doesn't have as many USB-Cs. But most of them are utilizing USB-C connections as opposed to the USB Type-A connections. And I could have gotten different cables, but that would have obviously required me to get more cables than I currently have, or different ones than I currently have. Okay, back to the Fusion Dock Max. Lots of good stuff, and for the most part, it all works. But it does have a few quirks. Quirk number one, I'm using an LG C3 TV as my monitor, and it only has HDMI outputs. It doesn't have a USB-C out. So when I plug in the HDMI to the Fusion dock, and then obviously it's running the display over the Thunderbolt connection to the MacBook, that's limited to 4K 60 Hz, which isn't a quirk of the Fusion dock. That's a limitation of the MacBook, unfortunately. So that's a downside, and we'll kind of get to that later, but that's not the problem. The problem is that the top menu bar on macOS is cut off. And I tried all the different resolution scaling options, and they all cut it off to varying degrees. Basically, if you did like the max resolution scaling, so 3840 by 2160, it was completely cut off. And then if you did like 1080p, it would bring back more of the menu bar, but it still was cut off a little bit. And the other quirk that I've run into is just some finickiness with the USB-A port. So I told you that I have the dongle for this wireless mouse, and I had it plugged into the front, one of the front USB-A ports, and it was working. And the next day I turned on my Mac or plugged my Mac back in, and then the mouse wasn't registering. So I swapped it out and put the dongle into one of the rear USB 3.0 ports, and it was working fine. Not a huge deal, but if you are utilizing all of the ports and then all of a sudden one of them isn't responding, it might mean you have to do some musical chairs with the USB connections. And then going back to the 4K 60 Hertz, and again, this isn't a problem with the dock. It's just a problem or a limitation of the way that Apple limits Thunderbolt 4 and HDMI speeds for some reason. I like to use the display of the MacBook alongside the monitor, the external monitor. So I like to use both. And I also like to sometimes utilize the trackpad while I'm editing because I can easily navigate through the timeline. So having the 120 Hz ProMotion display and then going over to a 60 Hz display is very noticeable. It just feels much more laggy and slow to respond. So I definitely want to utilize the 120 Hz that this monitor is capable of, but I can't do that utilizing the HDMI on the back of the dock. So I do have to plug in HDMI into the MacBook Pro. Not the end of the world, but it sort of defeats some of the purpose of using the dock, which is that you plug everything into the dock and only plug the dock into the MacBook. So I just have two things coming into the MacBook as opposed to one. On the plus side, in addition to giving you the Thunderbolt connector to plug the Mac into the dock, they also give you the high-speed HDMI cable, which is capable of 4K 120 Hz. So those are the only problems I've run into, and only two of them are really a problem with the dock as opposed to a problem or a limitation of the Mac. And lastly, let me just mention a couple things that I wish maybe could be better, because this is a very expensive dock, and I think it does have a ton of really great capabilities and a lot of ports. But just for instance, like the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, for this price, it would have been nice if it were a 10 gigabit Ethernet port. I can't make use of it, but if you're going to spend this kind of money, I'm sure that some people could make use of a 10 gig Ethernet connection. And then also the SD card reader. It seems a bit redundant. If you're going to pair this with your MacBook already has an SD card reader on it. I guess there's people who would stash their MacBook away like completely out of reach. They're going to want to use the SD card reader on the dock, but the speeds are the same, so you're not really getting an advantage there. Really, the only advantage is that it has a separate micro SD card reader, whereas the MacBook would require you to use like a full-size adapter to read micro SD cards. All that said, it would have been cool if they had included a CF Express card reader. That would have been like an added capability with a dock of this price. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm done. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you know where to go. Appreciate you watching the video, and maybe I'll see you in another one.